Zaria Johnson's fingers trembled as she held her phone, her father's voice booming through the speaker, while the flight attendant who had just tried to remove her from first class stood frozen in shock. "Do you know who my daughter is?" The entire cabin fell silent as passengers strained to hear the conversation. The flight attendant's face drained of color when she realized she'd just demanded that the daughter of World Air's largest minority investor give up her seat for a white businessman who hadn't even paid for first class. Would this become the biggest mistake of Brenda Miller's career? Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in standing up against injustice wherever it appears, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on powerful stories of courage and accountability. Now let's see how this unbelievable situation unfolded. Zaria Johnson had been looking forward to this flight for months. As a 20-year-old Black Harvard pre-law student, she had meticulously saved her airline miles for this premium experience. A first-class ticket from Atlanta to New York. She couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as she boarded ahead of other passengers, her designer carry-on rolling smoothly behind her. This was a taste of the success she had worked so hard for, a small reward for maintaining her perfect GPA despite the additional challenges she faced as one of the few Black students in her program. The moment she stepped into the first class cabin, however, she noticed flight attendant Brenda Miller's expression shift from professional courtesy to barely concealed suspicion. While the blonde, middle-aged attendant had been warmly greeting other passengers, her smile vanished when Zaria approached. "Ticket, please," Brenda demanded, her tone noticeably sharper than it had been with previous passengers. Zaria handed over her boarding pass, maintaining her composure despite the sudden change in atmosphere. Brenda scrutinized the ticket, flipping it over unnecessarily. "And may I see your ID as well?" she asked, despite not having requested identification from any of the white passengers who had boarded before Zaria. "Of course," Zaria replied politely, retrieving her driver's license from her wallet. As Brenda compared the ID to the boarding pass, Zaria noticed several white passengers settling into their seats without any additional verification. After a prolonged examination, Brenda reluctantly handed back the documents. "Seat 3A is by the window," she said flatly, without the welcome aboard she had offered to others. Zaria found her seat and stowed her bag, trying to brush off the uncomfortable interaction. She was determined to enjoy this experience. After all, she had earned it. As she settled into the plush leather seat, she couldn't help but notice how Brenda continued to glance in her direction, as if expecting her to steal the silverware. Just as the boarding process was nearing completion, a commotion erupted at the entrance to first class. Kenneth Reynolds, a white businessman in his 50s wearing an expensive suit, was arguing with another flight attendant. "This is unacceptable," he boomed, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I'm a Platinum Elite member. There must be some mistake with my booking." Brenda rushed over to assist, immediately adopting a sympathetic expression entirely absent from her interaction with Zaria. "What seems to be the problem, sir?" "I always fly first class," Kenneth insisted, waving his economy ticket dismissively. "I don't know how this happened, but it needs to be fixed." Without checking the computer system or consulting anyone, Brenda nodded reassuringly. "Let me see what I can do for you, Mr. Reynolds." To Zaria's astonishment, Brenda immediately headed straight toward her, a determined look on her face. "Excuse me, miss," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "It appears we have an overbooking situation in first class." Zaria blinked in confusion. "Overbooking? But I checked in yesterday and confirmed my seat." "Yes, well, sometimes these things happen," Brenda replied dismissively. "Mr. Reynolds here is one of our most valued Platinum Elite members, and we need to accommodate him. There's a nice seat available in economy, plus that we can move you to." Zaria felt heat rising to her face as she realized what was happening. "I'm sorry, but I paid for this seat with my miles. I checked in on time. There's no reason I should have to move." Brenda's expression hardened. "Perhaps you don't understand how these things work. When overbooking occurs, we have to make adjustments based on passenger status." "But there is no overbooking," Zaria pointed out, gesturing to the seat next to her that remained empty. "And that man doesn't have a first-class ticket. I do." Several passengers had begun to take notice of the confrontation. A middle-aged woman across the aisle had discreetly taken out her phone and appeared to be recording. Kenneth Reynolds stood behind Brenda, a smug expression on his face. "I'm going to have to insist," Brenda said, her voice rising. "If you refuse to comply with crew instructions, we have the authority to have you removed from the aircraft." The threat hung in the air. Zaria felt a mixture of humiliation and rage building inside her. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being publicly singled out and threatened. "This is because I'm black, isn't it?" Zaria asked quietly, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Brenda's eyes widened. "How dare you make such an accusation? This has nothing to do with race. This is about airline policy and respecting our high-status customers." More passengers were filming now. Kenneth Reynolds stepped forward, his sense of entitlement palpable. "Look, if she doesn't want to move, just call security and have her taken off. I've got a meeting in New York I can't be late for." Tears of frustration welled in Zaria's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she reached for her phone. "You know what? I think my father might have something to say about this," Brenda scoffed. "Oh, is Daddy going to come to the rescue? We're following standard protocol here." With steady fingers, Zaria dialed. After 2 rings, a deep voice answered. "Calvin Johnson speaking." "Dad," Zaria said, her voice finally breaking. "I need your help." "What's happening, Zaria?" Calvin Johnson demanded, instantly alert at the distress in his daughter's voice. As the founder and CEO of Johnson Tech, one of the nation's fastest-growing technology companies, Calvin was used to solving problems efficiently. Zaria quickly explained the situation, her voice growing steadier as she recounted the discriminatory treatment. The entire first-class cabin had fallen silent, passengers straining to hear the conversation. "Put the flight attendant on the phone," Calvin instructed, his voice calm but edged with steel. Zaria held out her phone to Brenda, who hesitated, before taking it with visible reluctance. "This is Senior Flight Attendant Brenda Miller," she said in her most professional tone. What followed was a one-sided conversation that left Brenda's face draining of color with each passing second. The passengers couldn't hear Calvin's words, but the effect was immediate. "Yes, sir," Brenda stammered. "I wasn't aware." "No, sir." "I understand, sir." Kenneth Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tide turning. Brenda's hand was now visibly shaking as she held the phone. "The pilot?" she squeaked. "Yes, of course. Right away, sir." Brenda hurried to the cockpit, returning moments later with the captain himself, a distinguished man in his 50s. She handed him the phone with a look of dread. "Captain William?" "Dave is speaking," he said confidently. Then his expression changed dramatically. "Mr. Johnson, the Calvin Johnson." He listened intently. "I had no idea, sir. Yes, I'm aware of your company's significant investment in World Air. This situation is completely unacceptable, and I assure you, it will be addressed immediately." The captain handed the phone back to Zaria, then turned to Brenda with a stern look. "Ms. Miller, Mr. Reynolds needs to return to his assigned seat in economy immediately." Kenneth's face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. Do you know who I am? I'm the executive vice president at Reynolds Financial." "Sir," the captain said firmly, "you purchased an economy ticket. We cannot and will not displace a rightfully seated first-class passenger to accommodate you. Please return to your assigned seat, or we'll have to deplane you before departure." Security was called, not for Zaria, but to escort Kenneth back to economy when he refused to move voluntarily. As he was led away, he shouted threats about calling the airline CEO himself and ensuring everyone lost their jobs. Once the commotion settled, the captain personally apologized to Zaria. "Ms. Johnson, on behalf of World Air, I want to express our deepest regrets for this incident. Please enjoy your flight, and everything will be complimentary today." Brenda had been ordered to stay away from the first-class cabin for the remainder of the flight. Another attendant, a young black woman named Tasha, took over service with genuine warmth and professionalism. As the plane finally took off, Zaria stared out the window, her emotions a complex mix of relief, lingering anger, and discomfort. Yes, she had won this battle, but only because of who her father was. What about all the other black passengers who didn't have a powerful parent to call? How many of them had been forced to give up their rightfully purchased seats because they lacked the connections to fight back? During the flight, several passengers approached to express support and share their own stories of discrimination. One elderly black woman quietly thanked her for standing her ground, saying, "In my day, we just had to take it. I'm proud to see young people like you fighting back." When they landed in New York, Zaria was surprised to find a team of World Air representatives waiting at the gate, led by the regional customer service director. They apologized profusely and assured her that the incident was being taken seriously. "We've already begun an investigation," the director explained. "Ms. Miller has been suspended pending the results, and we want to assure you that World Air does not tolerate discrimination of any kind." What Zaria didn't realize yet was that multiple videos of the incident had already been uploaded to social media while they were in the air. The hashtag #FirstClassWhileBlack was beginning to trend, and her private stand against discrimination was about to become very, very public. What would you do if you were in Zaria's position? Would you have stood your ground like she did, or would you have moved to avoid confrontation? Comment number 1 if you would have held firm, or number 2 if you think it wasn't worth the trouble. Don't forget to hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect regardless of their race. And subscribe to hear more stories about people standing up against discrimination. Now, as Zaria's story goes viral, how do you think the public will react? Will World Air's response be genuine or just damage control? Stay tuned to find out. By the time Zaria checked into her New York hotel that evening, her phone was exploding with notifications. The videos taken by fellow passengers had spread like wildfire across social media platforms. One clip, which captured the moment the captain returned from speaking with her father, had already garnered over 2 million views in just a few hours. "Oh my God," Zaria whispered, scrolling through her Twitter feed. The hashtag #FirstClassWhileBlack was trending nationally, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination on airlines and in other settings. Travel rights. Watching that World Air flight attendant try to remove a black woman from her paid first-class seat to give it to a white man who didn't pay for it is everything wrong with America. Our first class while black. Was black girl fly? Notice how fast they backed down when they found out her dad was rich and powerful? What about the rest of us who don't have billionaire parents? Or first class while black? Aviation news. Breaking: World Air facing major backlash after discriminatory incident. Stock down 3% in after-hours trading. First class while black. The comments section under the most popular video revealed just how common Zaria's experience was. "This happened to me last month. On Delta Jet, they said I must be in the wrong seat because I didn't look like I belonged in first class. I've literally had flight attendants ask me if I'm lost when I try to sit in business class. The shock on their faces when I show them my ticket is priceless and sad. This is why I dress up when I fly first class now. Sad that I have to look wealthy just to be left alone in a seat I paid for." World Air's PR team had scrambled to issue a statement while Zaria was still in the air. World Air is aware of an incident involving one of our passengers and is conducting a thorough investigation. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind and take these allegations very seriously. The flight attendant involved has been suspended pending investigation. We are in contact with the affected passenger and are working to address the situation appropriately. The statement was being picked apart online, with many criticizing its vague language and emphasis on allegations, despite clear video evidence. Mainstream news outlets had picked up the story by morning. Some framed it supportively. Black Harvard student stands her ground against airline discrimination. Others seemed to question the severity. Airline seating dispute goes viral. Racial incident or misunderstanding? Zaria's phone rang. It was her father. "Have you seen the news?" Calvin asked. "It's everywhere, Dad," Zaria replied, still in disbelief. "I just wanted to get to New York for my internship interview. I didn't mean to start a whole movement." "That's often how these things happen," Calvin said wisely. "One person stands up and it gives others courage." His tone turned serious. "But we need to talk about how to handle this. The media will be coming for you." As if on cue, Zaria's other line beeped. An unknown number. "That's probably them starting now," Calvin said. "Listen, say nothing until we get you proper representation. This isn't just about one flight attendant or one airline anymore. You're about to become the face of something bigger." Calvin was right. Within hours, Zaria had received interview requests from major networks, including CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News. Her social media follower count had jumped from a few hundred to over 50,000 overnight. World Air released an updated statement, announcing that senior flight attendant Brenda Miller had been suspended without pay, pending a full investigation, and that they were implementing additional diversity training for all staff. Meanwhile, internet sleuths had identified Kenneth Reynolds, the businessman who had demanded Zaria's seat. His company, Reynolds Financial, was facing its own backlash as people flooded their social media accounts with comments about the incident. Reynolds issued a statement through his company's PR team. "There was a misunderstanding regarding airline seating arrangements. At no point did I request that anyone be removed based on their race. I regret if my actions were perceived otherwise." The non-apology only fueled more outrage. As news of the incident spread, so did the hate mail. Zaria's university email inbox filled with messages ranging from disappointingly racist to frighteningly violent. "Go back to flying economy where you belong. Playing the race card to get special treatment. Typical. People like you are what's wrong with this country. Watch your back." That last one made Zaria's blood run cold. She forwarded it to campus security, who promised to monitor the situation. Her roommate Taylor called from campus. "Zaria, people are going through your Instagram and Twitter looking for anything they can use against you. They're even contacting people who've taken pictures with you asking for dirt." "What? Why would they do that?" Zaria asked, genuinely bewildered. "Because you're threatening the status quo," Taylor explained. "You're showing what black people go through every day, and some people would rather discredit you than face that reality." Zaria sat on her hotel bed, the weight of what was happening finally sinking in. She had stood up for herself on that plane, but now she was standing for something much bigger. The question was she ready for what would come next? The following morning, Zaria woke to discover that the narrative had begun to shift in disturbing ways. While scrolling through her phone, she noticed several conservative news outlets had picked up the story with a decidedly different spin. "Privileged daughter of tech billionaire uses father's influence to bully airline staff." Race card. Black student plays victim to get special treatment on flight. World Air employee suspended for doing her job. The untold story. One particularly inflammatory article featured a quote from an anonymous World Air employee. "What the K videos don't show is how disruptive Ms. Johnson was before the recording started. She was argumentative with the crew from the moment she boarded, demanding special treatment and making other passengers uncomfortable. The senior flight attendant was simply following protocol for disruptive passengers." Zaria stared at the screen in disbelief. She had been nothing but polite throughout the entire ordeal. This was a complete fabrication. Meanwhile, Kenneth Reynolds had secured an interview on a major morning news program. Looking polished and sympathetic, he recounted a version of events that barely resembled reality. "I was simply asking about available seating options as a frequent flyer when this young woman started making accusations of racism," he claimed. "Next thing I know, she's on the phone with her father, threatening to have everyone fired. If anyone was discriminated against, it was me. I was treated like a criminal just for making a routine inquiry." The show's host nodded sympathetically, without challenging any of his claims. Social media had become a battleground. While many continued to support Zaria, a counter hashtag had emerged. Schweizer boycott World Air, bizarrely framing the airline as the victim for suspending Brenda. What was even more disturbing was the leaked internal memo from World Air executive leadership that someone had anonymously sent to Zaria. Regarding the Johnson incident, "Our public strategy is to show appropriate concern while minimizing the EAI racial component. The passengers' claims are impossible to verify. Our legal team advises against any admission of systematic problems. Focus messaging on our commitment to reviewing all passenger interactions rather than acknowledging any specific wrongdoing." Stock price protection must be our priority. Zaria forwarded the memo to her father, her hands shaking with anger. They're trying to make this go away without addressing the real problem. Calvin sighed heavily. I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. I've already reached out to some of the other major investors. But Zaria, there's something else you should know. He paused. My company is suddenly facing a routine audit from regulators. The timing seems suspicious. You think it's connected? Zaria asked, alarmed. In business, there are no coincidences, Calvin replied grimly. Someone's sending a message. When Zaria returned to Harvard the following week, she felt the atmosphere had changed. Students whispered as she walked by. Some offered support, but others conspicuously avoided her. In her constitutional law class, a professor who had always been friendly suddenly called on her with unusual frequency, challenging her answers more aggressively than those of other students. Ms. Johnson, he said during one particularly tense exchange, perhaps if you spend as much time studying precedent as you do appearing on television, your arguments would be more compelling. Several students gasped at the obvious disrespect. The professor had never spoken to any other student that way. After class, the department head called Zaria into her office. We've received some concerns about your recent media attention, she said carefully. Harvard values its reputation for academic focus. Some feel that your situation is becoming a distraction. A distraction? Zaria repeated incredulously. I was discriminated against, and now I'm being blamed for it? Would Harvard prefer I had just given up my seat and reinforced that treating black passengers differently is acceptable? The department head's expression remained neutral. No one is saying that. We just want to ensure that your academic standing remains your priority. As Zaria left the office, she received a notification on her phone. Someone had dug up tweets she had posted 3 years earlier about police brutality and systematic racism. They were being circulated with misleading context, painting her as a radical extremist who cries racism at every opportunity. That evening, someone slipped an anonymous note under her dorm room door. Know your place or suffer the consequences. Campus security increased patrols around her residence hall, but Zaria still felt exposed. The backlash was growing beyond social media into something more tangible and threatening. When she called her father to update him, she could hear the strain in his voice. 3 of our major corporate clients have suddenly canceled their contracts, Calvin revealed. No explanation given, just sudden termination notices. Dad, this is getting scary, Zaria admitted. Maybe I should just issue a statement saying it was all a misunderstanding and move on. There was a long pause before Calvin responded. Is that what you want to do? Zaria thought about all the messages she'd received from black women thanking her for standing up, for making visible what they experienced routinely. She thought about the elderly lady on the plane who had thanked her for fighting back. No, she finally said, her resolve strengthening. That's not what I want to do. Then don't, Calvin said simply. If we back down now, nothing changes. But Zaria, you need to understand, this isn't going to get easier. The more you challenge the system, the harder it will fight back. As if to confirm his warning, Zaria's phone pinged with a news alert. World Air reinstates flight attendant amid questions about race hoax claims. They hadn't even completed their investigation, but Brenda Miller was already being restored to her position. The message was clear. Despite the videos, despite the witnesses, the system was closing ranks. Zaria took a deep breath and made a decision. Dad, I think I need a lawyer. We're going to file a discrimination lawsuit, Maya Washington announced, her voice steady and confident. As one of the nation's most respected civil rights attorneys, Maya had built her career taking on corporate giants and systemic discrimination. Her office in downtown Manhattan exuded both professionalism and warmth, with walls adorned with framed newspaper headlines documenting her most significant victories. Zaria and Calvin Johnson sat across from her, reviewing the detailed complaint she had prepared against World Air. This case has all the elements we need, Maya explained, her fingers tapping the thick document. Clear discriminatory treatment captured on video, witnesses willing to testify, and evidence suggesting this isn't an isolated incident, but rather part of a pattern at World Air. Calvin nodded, his face grave. What about the backlash? They've already started targeting my company, and Zaria is facing hostility at school. Maya's expression softened slightly. That's unfortunately common in high-profile discrimination cases. The system fights back. But it also tells us they're scared. They wouldn't be working this hard to discredit Zaria if they didn't know she could win. Zaria took a deep breath. I'm ready. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been through this without having the resources to fight back. The lawsuit was filed the next morning. Within hours, World Air's aggressive legal team had responded with threats of countersuits for defamation and business interference, claiming Zaria had misrepresented the incident for publicity and financial gain. When asked for comment, World Air's spokesperson released a statement. While we take all allegations seriously, we believe this lawsuit is without merit and appears motivated by financial opportunism rather than a genuine grievance. World Air has a stellar record of inclusivity, and we will vigorously defend our reputation. The case progressed to the discovery phase, where both sides could request documents and conduct depositions. Maya insisted on deposing Brenda Miller first, believing the flight attendant's testimony would be crucial. The deposition took place in a sterile conference room at the offices of Baldwin & Schmidt, World Air's prestigious law firm. Brenda arrived flanked by two corporate attorneys who had clearly coached her extensively. Maya started with basic questions about Brenda's training and employment history, gradually building toward the incident in question. Despite the attorney's preparation, Brenda grew increasingly uncomfortable as Maya methodically dismantled her version of events. Ms. Miller, Maya asked, her tone deliberately casual. Could you explain why you checked Ms. Johnson's ticket and ID multiple times when video evidence shows you didn't do the same for white passengers? I check IDs randomly as part of security protocols, Brenda stammered. Randomly? Maya raised an eyebrow. So it's just coincidence that out of 16 first-class passengers that day, the only person whose ID you randomly checked was the only black passenger. One of World Air's attorneys interjected. Objection, argumentative. Maya continued, undeterred. Ms. Miller, was there any legitimate reason why Mr. Reynolds, who held an economy ticket, should have been given a first-class seat over Ms. Johnson, who had a confirmed first-class reservation? Brenda shifted uncomfortably. He was a frequent flyer with status. So World Air's policy is that a white man with status but an economy ticket takes precedence over a black woman with a confirmed first-class ticket? That's not... I didn't mean... Brenda's composure cracked. Look, we're trained to accommodate certain types of passengers, the preferred passengers. And what does a preferred passenger look like to you, Ms. Miller? The room fell silent. After a long pause, Brenda whispered, like Mr. Reynolds, I suppose. The World Air attorneys looked stricken. One frantically scribbled a note and slid it in front of Brenda, but the damage was done. Maya pressed on. Have you received specific training about accommodating white passengers over others? Not explicitly, no, Brenda admitted. But there's an understanding. We're told to give special attention to our traditional customer base. That's the term they use in training. By the end of the deposition, Brenda had admitted to racial biases in World Air's training and culture that the company had never acknowledged publicly. The discovery process revealed more damning evidence. Internal emails showed a pattern of similar incidents across World Air's network, with customer complaints from minority passengers often flagged as sensitive no response needed in their system. Most shocking was an email chain between executives discussing how to manage the optics of passenger demographics in premium cabins to maintain the comfort of our core customer base. The messages stopped just short of explicitly stating that core customers meant white passengers, but the implication was unmistakable. As these revelations began leaking to the press, Kenneth Reynolds filed his own lawsuit against Zaria for defamation, claiming she had maliciously mischaracterized him as racist, causing substantial damage to his reputation and business. Meanwhile, Zaria faced growing pressure at Harvard. Anonymous complaints had been filed questioning her academic integrity, forcing her to defend papers and exams she had completed. Though the investigations found no wrongdoing, the process itself was draining and distracting. The preliminary hearing for Zaria's case against World Air attracted substantial media attention. Reporters packed the courtroom as Maya presented their evidence of systematic discrimination. World Air's attorneys argued that the incident was a regrettable misunderstanding, influenced by factors other than race. Judge Richard Harmon, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for conservative rulings, surprised observers with his comments during the hearing. "While I understand the plaintiff believes this is about race," he remarked, "couldn't this simply be an employee having a bad day? Are we to believe every customer service failure involving people of different races is discrimination?" Maya countered firmly. "Your Honor, when a pattern of bad days consistently affects only passengers of color, that's not coincidence, that's discrimination." Outside the courthouse, Zaria faced a barrage of reporters. Following Maya's guidance, she kept her comments brief and focused. This case isn't just about one seat on one flight. It's about whether companies can maintain policies that treat people differently based on the color of their skin. I believe the evidence speaks for itself. As she walked toward her car, a reporter shouted, "How does it feel to know you're destroying people's careers over a simple mistake?" Zaria paused, turning slowly to face the cameras. "I didn't destroy anyone's career," she replied evenly. "Discrimination did. And until we acknowledge that, nothing will change." Have you ever stood up against unfair treatment, even when it would have been easier to stay silent? Comment number 1 if you've challenged discrimination in your own life, or number 2 if you're inspired to be more courageous after hearing Zaria's story. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you believe in fighting for justice, no matter the personal cost. And if this story has moved you, give it a thumbs up to help others find it too. As this legal battle heats up, what do you think will happen next? Will the discovery of internal emails be enough to prove systemic discrimination? Or will World Air find a way to dismiss these revelations? Let's find out in the next part of this incredible true story. The email arrived at 2:37 a.m., sent from an anonymous account to Maya Washington's firm address. The subject line read simply, "What World Air doesn't want you to know." Maya almost dismissed it as spam until she noticed the attachment. An internal World Air document labeled Passenger Allocation Algorithm, Confidential. After scanning it for viruses, she opened the file and immediately called Zaria. "I just received something you need to see," Maya explained, her voice tense with suppressed excitement. "Someone inside World Air is blowing the whistle." The document detailed an algorithm used by World Air's booking system that systematically flagged demographic anomalies in premium cabins and identified passengers for potential reallocation during crowded flights. While carefully avoiding explicit racial terminology, the algorithm used proxies such as passenger names, addresses in predominantly minority neighborhoods, and even profile photos from linked frequent flyer accounts to assign customer experience priority scores. "They've been systematically pushing minorities out of first class," Maya explained. "And they built an entire system to do it while maintaining plausible deniability." The anonymous whistleblower had included additional documents, training materials instructing gate agents on how to approach reallocations with minimal resistance, and statistics showing that black passengers were 16 times more likely to be downgraded than white passengers with identical ticket types and status levels. Maya immediately filed the new evidence with the court. World Air's attorneys scrambled to have it dismissed, claiming the documents were obtained illegally, but Judge Harmon allowed them with the caveat that the source's identity would need to be revealed eventually. As Zaria and Maya dug deeper into the evidence, they discovered something even more disturbing. Kenneth Reynolds wasn't just an angry passenger. His investment firm had significant holdings in World Air's parent company, and he personally sat on advisory boards with several of World Air's executive team members. This wasn't random, Zaria realized. He specifically targeted me, knowing the crew would back him up. Calvin Johnson made his own discovery while reviewing his company's investment portfolio. The investment firm that manages our World Air stake has been concealing information from us, he told Zaria during their weekly strategy call. They've been deliberately omitting the airline's internal reports on passenger treatment from the materials they provide to minority investors. How is that legal? Zarya asked. It's not, Calvin replied grimly, but proving it would require access to documents they'll fight to keep sealed. The case took another troubling turn when a financial journalist uncovered connections between Judge Harmon and World Air's leadership. The judge had received over $50,000 in speaking fees from conferences organized by subsidiaries of World Air's parent company in the years before taking the bench. While not technically illegal if disclosed properly, the potential conflict of interest cast a shadow over his impartiality. Meanwhile, sources within the FBI leaked to major news outlets that they had opened a preliminary investigation into World Air's business practices, focusing on potential violations of civil rights, laws and public accommodations. As the pressure mounted, Zarya received an unmarked envelope at her campus apartment. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. Drop the case. Your father's company, your academic future, your safety, all at risk. This is your only warning. Zarya immediately reported the threat to both campus security and the FBI, but the damage to her sense of security was done. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, startling at unexpected sounds. Calvin faced his own pressures. Several business partners approached him privately, expressing concerns about his daughter's lawsuit and suggesting it might be better for everyone if she agreed to settle quickly and quietly. They're afraid, Calvin explained during a late-night call with Zarya and Maya. If World Air goes down for this, a lot of other companies with similar practices could be exposed. The system protects itself. Maya nodded grimly. We've also discovered attempts to hack into our case files. Our IT team caught someone trying to access our servers last night. They're getting desperate. The most frightening incident occurred 3 days before a major hearing. Zarya was crossing the street near the courthouse after a preparation meeting with Maya when a black sedan accelerated through a red light, missing her by inches. A bystander pulled her back just in time. The driver sped away, and despite traffic, cameras in the area, police reported that the vehicle's license plates were obscured and the driver couldn't be identified. That wasn't an accident, Zarya told her father that night, her voice shaking despite her efforts to stay calm. They're trying to scare me off. Calvin wanted to hire private security for his daughter, but Zarya refused. If I show up to court with bodyguards, it changes the narrative. They'll say I'm using my father's money to create drama. Instead, she agreed to Maya's suggestion to vary her routes, never travel alone, and keep location sharing active on her phone at all times. As the case moved forward, World Air's stock price began to suffer. Major institutional investors were quietly reducing their positions, concerned about potential liability and reputation damage. The company's desperate attempts to control the narrative were failing as more employees, emboldened by the whistleblower, began speaking out about the toxic culture. The night before a crucial hearing, Maya received another anonymous email. This one contained a voice recording of a meeting between World Air's CEO, legal team, and Kenneth Reynolds, discussing how to handle the Johnson situation. This needs to go away, Reynolds could be heard saying. Whatever it costs. My contacts at regulatory agencies can keep the heat on Johnson's company indefinitely. Everyone has skeletons. We just need to find theirs. The CEO's response was cautious but damning. Let's be careful about direct threats, but yes, we need this resolved before the algorithm documentation becomes public. The implications go far beyond this one case. Maya immediately sent the recording to her cybersecurity team to verify its authenticity. If genuine, it proved not just discrimination, but a coordinated conspiracy to obstruct justice and intimidate witnesses. The battle lines were drawn. On one side stood Zarya, her determined legal team, and a growing number of whistleblowers. On the other, a powerful corporation willing to use every tool at its disposal, legal and otherwise, to protect its reputation and practices. What had begun as a dispute over an airline seat had exposed an entire system designed to preserve inequality while maintaining plausible deniability. And the system was fighting back with everything it had. The constant stress began taking its toll on Zarya. Once at the top of her class, she now struggled to focus during lectures. Late nights reviewing case documents meant missed assignments. The fear following the near accident had her jumping at shadows, leading to insomnia that further impacted her academic performance. Professor Williams, her constitutional law instructor, called her in after she dozed off during class. "Ms. Johnson, your midterm paper was barely passing quality. This is not the work I've come to expect from you." "I'm sorry," Zaria murmured, exhaustion evident in her voice. "The case is taking more time than I expected." The professor's expression hardened. "While your activism may generate headlines, your primary responsibility is to your education. Perhaps you should consider whether this lawsuit is worth jeopardizing your future for." The following week, Zaria was summoned to meet with Dean Roberts. The university official sat stiffly behind his mahogany desk, a folder open before him. "Ms. Johnson, several faculty members have expressed concerns about your academic standing," he began without preamble. "Additionally, the administration is worried about how your continued media presence might reflect on Harvard's reputation." Zaria straightened in her chair. "My lawsuit against World Air has nothing to do with Harvard." "But it does," Dean Roberts countered. "When you appear on national television, you're identified as a Harvard student. Your actions reflect on this institution." He closed the folder. "We've received several complaints from alumni and donors expressing discomfort with the university being associated with such a controversial case." "Controversial?" Zaria repeated incredulously. "Standing against discrimination is controversial?" "Perception matters," the dean replied coldly. "Harvard has maintained its prestige by focusing on academic excellence, not by engaging in public crusades, however well-intentioned." The message was clear. Harvard was distancing itself from her fight. Outside the academic sphere, Zaria's social circle had contracted dramatically. Friends who had initially expressed support now avoided her, fearing association might impact their own career prospects. Invitations to study groups and social events had dried up almost entirely. Taylor, her roommate, remained loyal, but even she was feeling the pressure. "Someone stopped me in the dining hall yesterday," she confided. "They asked if I was comfortable living with you, like you're some kind of radical." Zaria tried to laugh it off, but the isolation stung. "Apparently fighting for your rights makes you dangerous." The situation worsened when Zaria returned to their apartment one evening to find the door ajar. Inside, her belongings had been ransacked. Scrawled across her bedroom wall in what looked like red lipstick were the words, "Race baiter" and "Know your place." Campus police documented the vandalism, but seemed skeptical when Zaria suggested it was connected to her lawsuit. "Students pull pranks," the officer remarked dismissively. "It's probably just someone who had too much to drink." Zaria didn't bother arguing. She was learning that many people preferred to dismiss racism rather than confront it. Calvin Johnson faced his own challenges. Johnson Tech, his technology company that had been on a meteoric rise, suddenly found itself losing major contracts. Government bids that had been all but secured were awarded to competitors. Private sector partners were pulling out of deals with vague excuses about restructuring priorities. "It's too coordinated to be coincidence," Calvin told Zaria during their encrypted video call. "Someone's making calls, pulling strings." Their suspicions were confirmed when an old friend in the Department of Commerce quietly informed Calvin that there had been unusual interest in Johnson Tech's government contracts from individuals connected to World Air's parent company. The most alarming incident came when Maya Washington arrived at her office to find the door lock broken and the space thoroughly ransacked. While her computer appeared untouched, physical files related to the World Air case had been rifled through, and a backup drive was missing. "They're getting desperate," Maya observed as police photographed the scene. "This actually gives me hope. They wouldn't be taking these risks if we weren't close to something big." That same day, Zaria's 16-year-old sister Amara called in tears. Students at her private high school had created a social media page mocking Zaria Johnson's race hoax and were harassing Amara with racist comments and memes. "They're saying you made everything up for attention," Amara sobbed. "The teachers aren't doing anything. They say it's just kids having opinions." Hearing her sister's distress was the breaking point for Zaria. She'd been prepared to face consequences herself, but watching her family suffer was almost unbearable. "Maybe we should settle," she suggested during an emergency meeting with Maya and Calvin later that day. "They're offering a substantial amount. We could use it to fund scholarships or support other discrimination cases." Calvin studied his daughter's face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. "Is that what you want, or what you think you should want?" "I don't know anymore," Zarya admitted. "I started this to stand up for what's right, but at what cost? Your company is suffering. Amara is being bullied. I'm about to flunk out of Harvard. Maybe changing the system isn't worth destroying everything we've built." Maya remained silent, allowing the father and daughter to work through the moment. Calvin leaned forward. "When I started Johnson Tech, everyone told me a black man couldn't succeed in the tech industry without compromising. I refused to believe them. Every door that closed just meant I needed to build my own doorway." He reached for Zarya's hand. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you, but remember why you started this fight." Before Zarya could respond, her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something compelled her to answer. "Is this Zarya Johnson?" a distorted voice asked. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "I know who's pressuring your father's company. I know why the judge is biased against you. I have proof of Reynolds' connection to World Air's discrimination policies." The voice paused. "Check your email in 5 minutes. After that, this number won't work again." The call ended. Zarya looked up at her father and lawyer, hope flickering for the first time in weeks. "I think we just got another ally." The stress and doubt of the past months had nearly broken her, but in that moment, Zarya remembered something her grandmother used to say. "When the path gets darkest, that's how you know you're heading toward the light." "I'm not settling," she announced, her resolve strengthening. "They're afraid because we're winning. We just need to hold on a little longer." The headline splashed across the Wall Street Journal's front page, shocked Zarya to her core. Tech CEO Calvin Johnson urges daughter to settle discrimination case against World Air. The article quoted Calvin as saying, "While I support my daughter unconditionally, I believe this case has become unnecessarily adversarial. A resolution that acknowledges concerns while allowing all parties to move forward would be in everyone's best interest." Zarya stared at her phone in disbelief. Her father had been her strongest supporter throughout this ordeal. Why would he suddenly undermine their case publicly without even discussing it with her first? She immediately tried calling him, but his assistant said he was unavailable. His text response was equally confusing. "Trust the process. Can't talk now." Within hours, World Air's legal team had reached out to Maya with an enhanced settlement offer, $5 million for Zarya personally, with an additional $15 million to establish a customer relations improvement fund. The catch, a comprehensive, non-disclosure agreement that would prevent Zarya from ever discussing the incident or World Air's policies. Media coverage shifted dramatically. Conservative outlets claimed Calvin's statement proved the case had been exaggerated from the beginning. "Even her own father thinks she's gone too far," one commentator declared smugly. Liberal publications speculated about corporate pressure tactics. "Has Johnson been silenced through threats to his business?" one headline questioned. Social media was equally divided, though the prevailing sentiment seemed to be that Zarya had been exposed as an opportunist. The hashtag #TheTroy Fraud began trending. Kenneth Reynolds gave a triumphant interview to a business network. "I harbor no ill will toward Ms. Johnson," he said with practiced sincerity. "Young people often see the world in black and white. If you'll pardon the expression, I'm pleased that cooler heads are prevailing." The interview concluded with the news that World Air had completed its internal investigation and reinstated Brenda Miller with additional cultural sensitivity training. The company released a statement affirming that while they regretted the misunderstanding, they had found no evidence of systematic discrimination in their practices. Zarya felt utterly betrayed and isolated. Harvard students who had previously supported her now awkwardly avoided eye contact in hallways. One professor explicitly advised her to take the win and move on, before her academic career became collateral damage. Even Maya seemed to be wavering. "We should at least consider the offer," she suggested during a tense meeting in her office. $20 million could fund a lot of advocacy work. But it would come with silence, Zarya countered. Everything. We've uncovered. The algorithm, the training materials, the executive communications, all of it buried under legal agreements. How does that help anyone except World Air? Maya sighed. Sometimes partial victories are all we get. The system is designed to wear down those who challenge it. That evening, as Zarya sat alone in her apartment contemplating her options, she received an unexpected package. Inside was a USB drive and an unsigned note. Your father didn't betray you. They're blackmailing him. See attached. The drive contained emails between executives at Reynolds Financial and a shell company that had recently acquired a controlling interest in one of Johnson Tech's major lenders. The messages outlined a strategy to call in Johnson Tech's loans immediately if Calvin didn't publicly distance himself from his daughter's lawsuit. There was more. Financial records showing a coordinated effort to short Johnson Tech stock while simultaneously spreading rumors about accounting irregularities to financial journalists. Evidence of pressure applied to government agencies to scrutinize the company's contracts. The final document was a dossier on Calvin himself, containing private information that could only have been obtained through illegal surveillance, including details about a past relationship that had ended badly. The threat was implicit but clear. Zarya immediately encrypted the files and sent copies to secure locations. Then she called her father using a disposable phone she had purchased for emergencies. "Dad, I know what's happening," she said when he answered. "I've seen the blackmail material." There was a long silence before Calvin responded, his voice heavy with relief and shame. "I'm sorry, Zarya. I thought I was protecting you and the company. They threatened everything we've built, not just the business but our family's reputation, your future." "It's not your fault," Zarya assured him. "But we can't let them win like this. These tactics prove how desperate they are." "What's your plan?" Calvin asked, the familiar determination returning to his voice. "First, we need to meet in person, somewhere secure. Bring your most trusted security team." Zarya paused. "And Dad? We're going to need Maya, but I'm not sure who else on her team we can trust anymore." The next day, they gathered at a private home outside Boston, owned by one of Calvin's college friends. Present were Zarya, Calvin, Maya, and Taylor, whose family's cybersecurity firm had been enlisted to secure their communications. Maya was visibly shaken after reviewing the evidence. "This goes beyond intimidation into criminal conspiracy," she acknowledged. "But it also explains something that's been bothering me. Information about our legal strategy has been leaking. Someone on my team must be compromised." They devised a careful plan. Maya would feed different pieces of false information to each member of her legal team, allowing them to identify the mole by which false details reached World Air's attorneys. Meanwhile, Calvin would appear to be cooperating with World Air's demands, while actually gathering evidence of the blackmail attempt. As a board member of several major financial institutions, he had connections that could trace the money behind the shell companies targeting his business. Taylor's family firm would provide digital security and help recover the deleted surveillance footage from the hit-and-run attempt on Zarya. Her father, a former FBI cybercrime specialist, believed they could identify the vehicle and driver with enhanced imaging techniques. "What about the settlement offer?" Maya asked. "They'll get suspicious if we simply go silent." "Counter-offer," Zarya suggested. "Request a longer negotiation period. Ask for modifications to the NDA. Give them hope we're caving while we build our counterstrike." The meeting lasted until dawn, but by the end they had a comprehensive strategy. As they prepared to leave, Calvin pulled his daughter aside. "I've never been prouder of you," he said quietly. "You had every right to think I'd betrayed you, but instead, you looked for the truth." Zarya hugged him tightly. "They thought attacking you would weaken us. They don't understand that's exactly what makes us fight harder." For the first time in weeks, Zarya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The forces aligned against her were powerful, but they had made a critical mistake. They had assumed she was fighting for herself, for money or recognition. They didn't understand she was fighting for something much bigger, the principle that justice shouldn't depend on wealth, connections, or the color of one's skin. As Taylor drove her back to campus, Zaria scrolled through her phone, reviewing the seemingly overwhelming odds they faced: a biased judge, compromised legal team, powerful corporate enemies, media manipulation, and academic pressure. "Do you really think we can win against all this?" Taylor asked, voicing the doubt Zaria herself had been fighting. Zaria thought about all the messages she'd received from people sharing their own experiences of discrimination, all hoping her case might change things. She thought about her sister Amara and the world she would inherit. "We have to," she said simply, "because if people with every advantage, education, resources, connections, can't stand up to this system, what hope does anyone else have?" The battle ahead would be even more difficult than what they'd already faced. But for the first time, Zaria understood that the opposition's escalating tactics weren't signs of strength. They were signs of fear, and that gave her hope. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was being forced to work against you? Comment number 1, if you've experienced betrayal that later had an explanation, or number 2, if you've had to forgive someone who was caught in an impossible situation. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want to see more stories about people fighting against systems designed to silence them. And drop a like if you're rooting for Zaria to expose the corruption at World Air. The stakes keep getting higher in this battle for justice. Do you think Zaria's team will be able to identify the mole in their midst? Will Calvin's financial connections help them trace the money behind the blackmail attempt? Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll see if truth and justice can triumph against corporate power. Operation Truthfinder began with Maya's carefully orchestrated leak of false information. Each member of her legal team received a different story about their next strategic move. Within 48 hours, World Air's attorneys filed a motion addressing the exact false information given to Derek Patterson, a junior associate who had joined the firm 6 months earlier. "It's confirmed," Maya told Zaria and Calvin during their secure video conference. "Patterson has been feeding them everything. He was hired specifically to infiltrate cases against major corporations. My investigator found payments to him from a shell company linked to the same network targeting Johnson Tech. Rather than confronting Patterson immediately, they decided to use him to their advantage, deliberately feeding him misleading information while pursuing their actual strategy through trusted channels. Meanwhile, Calvin leveraged his connections in the financial world to trace the money behind the attacks on his company. What he discovered was alarming. Reynolds Financial had created an elaborate network of shell companies to coordinate the assault on Johnson Tech without leaving fingerprints. "Reynolds isn't just a random businessman who wanted a first-class seat," Calvin explained, showing the complex financial diagrams. "He's part of an investment group with significant holdings in several airlines, including World Air. They've been using discriminatory practices to maintain a certain passenger profile in premium cabins for years." Zaria was building her own coalition. She created a secure online forum for passengers who had experienced similar discrimination on World Air flights. Within weeks, over 200 people had come forward with detailed accounts, many including photos, videos, and correspondence with the airline. One participant, Dr. Elaine Chen, was particularly valuable. As a data scientist who frequently flew for business, she had noticed patterns in how she was treated compared to her white colleagues. She offered to analyze the growing database of incidents. "The statistical evidence is overwhelming," Dr. Chen reported after compiling the data. "When controlling for all variables like ticket type, frequent flyer status, and time of booking, Black and brown passengers are downgraded or challenged about their seating 26 times more frequently than white passengers. This grassroots evidence corroborated the internal algorithm the whistleblower had revealed, creating a powerful two-pronged attack. The company's own documents showed intent, while the passenger experiences demonstrated impact. Maya used this new coalition to expand their legal strategy. What had begun as Zaria's individual discrimination case evolved into a class action lawsuit with dozens of plaintiffs. Each person brought their own story, creating a tapestry of experiences, too consistent to be coincidental. Former World Air employees began coming forward as well. Most had signed NDAs when leaving the company, but Maya's team found legal pathways around these agreements when discrimination was involved. "We were trained to watch for seat inconsistencies," a former gate agent explained in a confidential deposition. That was code for passengers who didn't match the first-class profile. We were told to find creative ways to reseat them, especially if certain high-value passengers needed accommodation. The most damaging testimony came from Aaron Michaels, a former IT contractor who had worked on World Air's passenger management system. The algorithm wasn't a bug, it was a feature, he stated. They specifically requested code that would flag potential seating conflicts based on passenger demographics without explicitly mentioning race. Calvin's business strategy was equally effective. He quietly reached out to other minority investors in World Air, sharing evidence of how information had been selectively withheld from them. Several major pension funds and sovereign wealth funds that prioritized ethical investment were particularly disturbed by the revelations. Their stock is already down 12%, Calvin reported. 3 board members have quietly sold their shares. They know what's coming. The final piece fell into place when Brenda Miller, the flight attendant at the center of the initial incident, reached out to Maya through an intermediary. After being reinstated with great fanfare, she had been relegated to the least desirable routes and subjected to hostile treatment from management. They used me as a scapegoat, then punished me for drawing attention, she explained tearfully. I've seen how they operate from the inside now. I was wrong about many things, including my own biases, and I want to make it right. Brenda agreed to testify about World Air's training practices, including how flight attendants were taught to identify valued passengers and maintain cabin comfort, euphemisms for prioritizing white customers and minimizing the presence of minorities in premium cabins. The coalition's growing strength didn't go unnoticed. World Air's stock continued to drop as investor concerns mounted. Kenneth Reynolds' company faced its own crisis as the connections to the discrimination algorithm were exposed. Institutional clients, particularly universities and government pension funds with diversity commitments, began withdrawing their investments. Throughout this period, Zaria maintained the appearance of considering settlement negotiations, buying time for their alliance to strengthen and evidence to accumulate. She used the reprieve to focus on her studies, gradually rebuilding her academic standing at Harvard. Most crucially, the anonymous whistleblower continued providing information, including evidence that World Air executives had specifically discussed how to handle Zaria's complaint in ways that would discourage future discrimination claims. They didn't just discriminate, Maya told Zaria after reviewing the latest documents. They had a deliberate strategy to silence complaints that elevates this from a civil rights violation to a potential criminal conspiracy. With each passing week, their position strengthened while World Air's weakened. The alliance of passengers, former employees, ethical investors, and legal experts had accomplished what Zaria alone could not. They had shifted the balance of power. During a strategy session at Maya's office, Calvin expressed what they were all feeling. We're no longer just fighting a case. We're revealing an entire system designed to preserve discrimination while maintaining plausible deniability. Zaria nodded. And that's exactly why they fought so hard. This was never about one seat on one plane. It was about who belongs in first class, and by extension, who belongs in the corridors of power in this country. Their alliance had transformed a personal injury into a movement. And movements, unlike individuals, couldn't be silenced, bought off, or intimidated into submission. Maya Washington stood before Judge Harmon, her posture confident despite the gravity of the moment. Your Honor, in light of the substantial new evidence and the significant number of additional plaintiffs, we are filing an expanded class action lawsuit against World Air for systematic discrimination against minority passengers. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and many of the plaintiffs who had joined the case. Zaria sat at the front table beside Maya, her expression composed despite the butterflies in her stomach. World Air's lead attorney, James Baldwin, immediately objected. Your Honor, this is clearly an attempt to inflate a simple customer service incident into something it never was. The plaintiffs are engaged in a fishing expedition, attempting to extract a settlement through media pressure and expanding claims. Judge Harmon, who had previously seemed sympathetic to World Air, now faced a dilemma. The financial journalists, Exposé of his connections to World Air's parent company had been picked up by major newspapers, casting doubt on his impartiality. Ethics complaints had been filed with the Judicial Review Board. "Mr. Baldwin," the judge said carefully, "given the number of plaintiffs now involved and the nature of the evidence submitted, I believe this case warrants full exploration. Your objection is overruled." It was their first significant procedural victory. That afternoon, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the American Civil Liberties Union, and several other major civil rights organizations filed amicus briefs supporting the plaintiff's case. Calvin Johnson was executing his own counterattack on the financial front. Using his position as a major investor, he had requested an emergency shareholder meeting to address potentially illegal practices that pose material risks to World Air's business model and shareholder value. Many institutional investors who had initially been reluctant to get involved were now demanding answers. Several had fiduciary obligations that required them to investigate potential misconduct that could impact their investments. World Air's CEO, Richard Blackwell, attempted to reassure the market with a televised interview. These allegations represent isolated incidents that in no way reflect World Air's commitment to serving all passengers with dignity and respect. "We are confident that when the facts emerge, our reputation for excellence will be reaffirmed." But the damage control was undermined when World Air's legal team was caught completely unprepared for Maya's next legal maneuver. Instead of focusing solely on the discrimination algorithm, she filed a motion to compel discovery of all communications related to the company's response to Zaria's initial complaint. "The cover-up reveals more than the original offense," Maya argued before the court. World Air didn't just discriminate. They orchestrated a campaign to discredit a passenger who spoke up, then leveraged business connections to pressure her family into silence. Judge Harmon, increasingly concerned about how his handling of the case might be perceived, granted the motion. The ruling opened the floodgates to internal emails, meeting minutes, and strategy documents detailing World Air's response to the incident. Meanwhile, Kenneth Reynolds' company faced its own legal crisis. A whistleblower from Reynolds Financial had provided the Securities and Exchange Commission with evidence that the firm had engaged in market manipulation to damage Johnson Tech's stock price. The SEC launched a formal investigation, sending Reynolds Financial's shares plummeting and triggering a run of client withdrawals. The judge, who had previously ruled favorably for World Air, found himself facing increasing scrutiny. After several media outlets reported on his financial connections to the airline's parent company, pressure mounted for him to recuse himself. "Your Honor," Maya argued during a hearing, "the appearance of impartiality is fundamental to our judicial system. Given the recently disclosed financial relationships between yourself and entities connected to the defendant, we respectfully request your recusal." After several tense moments, Judge Harmon announced, "While I maintain that I can be impartial in this matter, to avoid any appearance of impropriety, I will recuse myself from further proceedings in this case." The case was reassigned to Judge Eliza Martinez, known for her meticulous approach to evidence and strict ethical standards. Her first action was to allow full discovery, rejecting World Air's attempts to limit the scope of the investigation. Brenda Miller's decision to testify for the plaintiffs proved crucial. In preparation sessions with Maya, she provided detailed accounts of World Air's training practices, including how flight attendants were instructed to identify passengers who might be seated incorrectly, a euphemism she now recognized as targeting minorities in premium cabins. "We were never explicitly told to discriminate," Brenda explained, "but the examples used in training all featured well-dressed white passengers as the typical first-class customer. We were taught to be particularly vigilant about passengers who might be in the wrong cabin, which almost always meant people of color." World Air's PR crisis deepened as more employees came forward. A group of ethical hackers allied with Zaria's cause released redacted internal communications showing executives discussing how to maintain the desired cabin composition without explicitly mentioning race. The airline's desperate attempt to stem the bleeding led to increasingly generous settlement offers, now reaching $50 million with fewer restrictions on disclosure. The goal was clear: stop the case before more damaging evidence became public. But Zaria, Calvin, and Maya remained resolute. They're not offering a settlement because they want to make things right, Maya pointed out during a strategy session. They're offering it because what we haven't yet exposed is even worse than what we have. With each passing day, the balance of power shifted further. World Air, once confident in its ability to outlast and outspend a single plaintiff, now faced a coordinated legal, financial, and public relations assault it had never anticipated. They thought wealth and power made them untouchable, Calvin observed as they reviewed the latest developments. They never expected us to beat them at their own game. Zarya nodded, thinking about how far they had come from that initial confrontation on the plane. This was never about just winning a case, she said quietly. It's about changing the rules of the game. The Edmund Pettus Federal Courthouse in Manhattan fell silent as Zarya Johnson took the stand. After months of legal maneuvering, evidence gathering, and testimony from dozens of witnesses, the moment had arrived for the central figure in the EU case to tell her story. Maya Washington approached her client with measured steps. Ms. Johnson, please tell the court in your own words what happened on World Air Flight 1382 from Atlanta to New York on March 17th. Zarya took a deep breath and recounted the incident with remarkable composure, describing Brenda Miller's immediate suspicion, the multiple checks of her ticket and ID that white passengers hadn't faced, and Kenneth Reynolds's demand for her seat despite holding an economy ticket. It wasn't just about a seat, she concluded. It was about belonging, about who deserves to occupy certain spaces in our society. The message was clear. No matter what I achieved or what I paid for, I didn't belong there because of the color of my skin. World Air's attorney attempted to portray the incident as a misunderstanding during cross-examination. Isn't it possible, Ms. Johnson, that you misinterpreted Ms. Miller's actions? That this was simply about airline procedures rather than your race? Zarya met his gaze steadily. If it were about procedures, Mr. Baldwin, why weren't white passengers subjected to the same checks? Why was Mr. Reynolds's demand for my seat accommodated without verification? Why did the situation only resolve when my father's position was revealed? She paused. The pattern is clear to anyone willing to see it. Brenda Miller's testimony the following day created an even greater stir. The flight attendant who had once been the face of World Air's defense now became one of their most damaging witnesses. I believed I was following protocol, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. But I've come to recognize my own biases and how company policies reinforced them. We were trained to identify passengers who looked out of place. In premium cabins, we all understood what that meant without it being explicitly stated. When asked why she had changed her position, Brenda replied simply, because living with a lie was destroying me. Because I want to be part of the solution, not the problem. Kenneth Reynolds took the stand next, his usual confidence noticeably diminished by the SEC investigation into his company. Under Maya's skillful questioning, his carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. Mr. Reynolds, can you explain why you specifically approached Ms. Johnson's seat rather than any of the other occupied seats in first class? As I've stated, it appeared to be available, he replied stiffly. Available? Despite Ms. Johnson clearly sitting in it? From my perspective, she seemed to be gathering her belongings, possibly to move. Maya displayed a still image from the plane's security camera. This was taken 30 seconds before you approached her seat. Does Ms. Johnson appear to be gathering her belongings here? The image clearly showed Zarya comfortably settled, reading a book. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. My recollection may be imperfect. Let's discuss your relationship with World Air, Maya continued. You've testified that you were simply a passenger, yet evidence shows you've had over 30 meetings with World Air executives in the past year. Can you explain that discrepancy? As Reynolds struggled to justify the contradiction, his testimony devolved into a series of I don't recalls and to the best of my knowledge qualifiers that undermined his credibility. The most dramatic moment came when Richard Blackwell, World Air's CEO, was forced to testify. Under oath, he initially denied knowledge of any algorithm designed to identify minority passengers for potential reseating. Maya methodically presented internal emails, meeting minutes, and development specifications that contradicted his testimony. Mr. Blackwell, These documents bear your signature and approval. Are you testifying under oath that you were unaware of what you were approving? Backed into a corner, Blackwell attempted to shift blame to lower-level employees. If such practices occurred, they were not authorized at the executive level. Maya presented one final document, minutes from a board meeting where Blackwell himself had discussed the passenger composition management system and its benefits for maintaining the expected first-class environment. The CEO's face paled as he recognized his own words. His subsequent attempts to explain away the damning evidence only further damaged World Air's case. Outside the courtroom, World Air faced a different kind of crisis. Calvin Johnson had successfully organized a coalition of institutional investors representing over 40% of the company's shares. They had called an emergency board meeting to address the ongoing litigation and its impact on shareholder value. The evidence presented in court points to systematic practices that expose our investment to significant legal and reputational risk, stated the representative from a major pension fund. We demand immediate leadership changes and a complete overhaul of these discriminatory systems. World Air's stock had plummeted 30% since the trial began. Financial analysts were questioning the company's viability if the lawsuit resulted in massive damages and triggered similar cases against other airlines. Kenneth Reynolds' company was in even worse shape. As the SEC investigation expanded to include potential fraud and market manipulation, Reynolds' financial hemorrhaged clients. The firm's stock had lost over 60% of its value, and bankruptcy rumors were circulating on Wall Street. Media coverage, initially divided, had consolidated around a narrative of corporate wrongdoing and systematic discrimination. The whistleblower documents, employee testimonies, and statistical evidence had created a compelling story that even skeptical outlets couldn't ignore. As the trial neared its conclusion, Judge Martinez called both legal teams to her chambers. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm inclined to rule for the plaintiffs," she informed them candidly. "I strongly suggest World Air consider its position before I issue my ruling." That evening, World Air's board voted to remove Richard Blackwell as CEO. The company's new leadership reached out to Maya with an unprecedented offer. They would accept liability, implement all structural changes requested by the plaintiffs, and establish a substantial compensation fund. But they needed a framework that wouldn't bankrupt the airline. "They're capitulating," Maya told Zaria and Calvin during a late-night strategy session. "The question now is what victory looks like. What changes will actually transform the industry, not just this one company?" Zaria considered the question carefully. This was never about punishing one airline. It was about changing a system that treats people differently based on how they look. She outlined a vision that went beyond monetary damages to fundamental changes in how airlines operated, trained staff, and measured success. As dawn broke over Manhattan, they had crafted a framework for not just resolving the case, but transforming an industry. In the matter of Johnson et al. Versus World Air Inc., the parties have reached a settlement agreement, Judge Martinez announced to the packed courtroom. "I have reviewed the terms and find them to be fair, comprehensive, and in the public interest." The historic settlement made headlines worldwide. World Air agrees to record a $137 million discrimination settlement. Landmark airline case transforms industry practices. From first-class confrontation to systemic change, the Johnson settlement. Unlike most corporate settlements, this one came with no confidentiality clauses or NDAs. All plaintiffs were free to share their experiences, ensuring the case would have lasting educational impact rather than being buried in legal archives. The financial compensation was substantial, $75 million divided among the class members who had experienced discrimination, with additional funds for those who had suffered particular hardship. But the structural changes were even more significant. World Air committed to completely redesigning its passenger management system, eliminating any algorithms that could produce discriminatory outcomes. Independent auditors would regularly test the system for bias. The company agreed to overhaul its training programs, with input from civil rights organizations and affected passengers. Brenda Miller, in an unexpected development, became part of the team designing new approaches to customer service based on dignity and equality. Most groundbreaking was the creation of an independent passenger equity monitoring office, with real authority to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary action when discrimination occurred. As news of the settlement spread, other airlines began preemptively examining their own practices, fearing similar lawsuits. Industry associations convened emergency meetings to develop new standards that would protect companies from similar liability. Kenneth Reynolds faced his own reckoning. The SEC investigation had expanded to include criminal charges for financial fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. His company collapsed as clients fled and regulatory penalties mounted. The man who had demanded Zaria's seat now faced the prospect of prison time. Calvin Johnson leveraged his experience to launch an industry-wide initiative for equity in travel, bringing together airlines, civil rights organizations, and regulatory agencies to establish clear standards and accountability mechanisms. Transportation. Justice is economic justice, Calvin explained at the initiative's launch. When we allow discrimination in who can access travel and how they're treated, we reinforce broader inequalities in our society. Zaria took a different path. Using a portion of her settlement, she established the First Class Justice Foundation, providing legal support to victims of discrimination who lacked the resources to fight powerful institutions. The foundation quickly became a respected force in civil rights advocacy, partnering with law schools to train the next generation of equality-focused attorneys. Harvard, which had once pressured Zaria to abandon her fight, now embraced her as a success story. The law school invited her to join a prestigious civil rights clinic as a special student advisor, recognizing the real-world expertise she had gained through her case. Many who had doubted or criticized Zaria publicly acknowledged their error. Media outlets that had questioned her motives or downplayed the discrimination now produced special reports on systemic bias in customer service across industries. At the foundation's opening ceremony, Zaria reflected on the journey. What began as a humiliating moment on an airplane revealed something profound about our society. When we're told we don't belong in certain spaces, whether it's a first-class cabin, a boardroom, or a courtroom, we have a choice. We can accept the limitations others place on us, or we can challenge the very systems designed to exclude us. She scanned the diverse audience that included many former plaintiffs, activists, and even some former World Air employees who had become allies in reform. The most powerful forces in our society want us to believe that change is impossible, that the systems are too entrenched. But this case proves otherwise. When we stand together, speak truth, and persist despite intimidation, even the most powerful institutions can be transformed. The story of Zaria Johnson's stand against discrimination became a case study taught in law schools, business ethics courses, and civil rights programs across the country. What might have remained a private humiliation had become a catalyst for industry-wide transformation. 5 years later, a study by independent researchers found that reported incidents of discrimination on airlines had decreased by 63% since the World Air settlement. The structural changes pioneered in the case had spread throughout the industry, creating new standards of accountability and equity. During a flight to a speaking engagement, Zaria found herself once again in first class. As she settled into her seat, the flight attendant smiled warmly. "Ms. Johnson, it's an honor to have you aboard. Your case changed everything about how we work." Looking around the cabin, Zaria noted the diverse passengers all being treated with equal respect and dignity. She thought about how many people would never know what it had taken to create this change, the threats, the isolation, the moments of doubt and fear. But as the plane rose above the clouds, she felt a profound sense of peace. The fight had been worth every painful moment. Because of her willingness to stand firm that day, countless others would never have to experience what she had endured. The seat beside her remained empty until the last moment, when an elderly black woman boarded and checked her ticket. "Is this 2B?" she asked tentatively. "Yes, it is," Zaria confirmed with a smile. "Welcome to first class. You belong here." The woman settled in, her expression a mixture of enjoyment and lingering apprehension, the kind that comes from a lifetime of being made to feel out of place in premium spaces. "First time in first class?" Zaria asked gently. "Yes," the woman admitted. "I've always been nervous to try, even though I could afford it. I've heard the stories. Zaria smiled. Things have changed. Enjoy every moment of it. You've earned it. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Zaria reflected on how change happens, not always through grand gestures or famous victories, but often through ordinary people refusing to accept injustice, even when standing alone. The true measure of progress wasn't just in courtroom victories or policy changes, but in moments like this. An elderly black woman feeling, perhaps for the first time, that she truly belonged in a space once designed to exclude her. That was the real transformation, not just in systems and policies, but in human dignity and belonging. Zaria Johnson's story teaches us that standing up against discrimination requires more than just individual courage. It demands strategic resilience and collective action. When confronted with systemic racism, the opposition often escalates before it retreats, using wealth, connections, and institutional power to silence those who challenge the status quo. True change happens when we refuse to be intimidated, gather evidence methodically, build coalitions across different spheres of influence, and target the policies that enable discrimination rather than just the individuals who enact it. The case demonstrates that corporate accountability is possible when we expose not just isolated incidents, but patterns of behavior. By revealing World Air's discriminatory algorithm, training practices, and executive decisions, Zaria transformed a personal humiliation into industry-wide reform. Her experience shows that technology and systems often reflect and amplify existing biases, unless explicitly designed for equity. Perhaps most importantly, the story reminds us that belonging in spaces traditionally reserved for the privileged is a fundamental right worth fighting for. When Zaria refused to give up her seat, she wasn't just defending a personal purchase. She was challenging the invisible boundaries that determine who deserves dignity and respect in our society. Her victory created pathways for others to occupy spaces previously denied to them, proving that persistence in the face of injustice doesn't just win cases, it transforms systems and expands human possibility. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in spaces where you were made to feel you didn't belong? What did you do in that moment, and looking back, would you have handled it differently? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might give someone else the courage to stand up next time. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help it reach others who need to hear this message of courage and transformation. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change in the face of injustice. Remember, whether you're standing up against discrimination or supporting those who do, every action matters in creating a world where everyone belongs. Thank you for joining us today, and may you always find the strength to occupy your rightful place with dignity and conviction.